Picture this, a beautiful suburban neighborhood where every house looks like it could be straight out of a magazine. It's one of those places where the lawns are always perfect, and everyone waves politely when they see you. Now, in one of these homes, there's this family, the kind you'd look at and think, wow, they've got it all figured out. You've got the dad, Mark Sullivan, right? He's the guy who's always working hard, making sure his family has everything they need, loves his wife, Sarah, and adores his daughter, Emily. The classic picture of a devoted father. Then there's the mom. She's warm, caring, and has this close bond with their daughter, always involved in her life. You'd see them together and think they were best friends. But here's the thing, their daughter, Emily, a smart high school senior, has been pulling away lately. You know, like when someone starts acting distant, but you can't quite put your finger on why. The parents are worried, but they chalk it up to teenage stuff. Stress about school, college coming up, that kind of thing. They figure it'll blow over. But then, there's this middle-aged guy, a longtime family friend, practically part of the furniture. He's been around forever, especially close with the dad. You know the type, right? He's there for family dinners, holiday barbecues, all of it. Everyone likes him. To the parents, he's trustworthy, reliable, just an all-around good guy. Everything looks perfect on the surface, but there's something in the air, an underlying tension that no one's really talking about yet. It's like that uneasy feeling you get when something's off, but you don't know what it is. And trust me, things are about to get messy in ways no one's ready for. It all starts like any other day. Emily leaves the house for school, just like she always does. Sarah watches her from the kitchen window, thinking nothing of it. Why would she? It's routine. But when the afternoon rolls around, and Emily doesn't walk through that front door, something small starts to itch at the back of Sarah's mind. At first, it's no big deal. Maybe she's staying late for a project, Sarah tells herself. But when Mark gets home and there's still no sign of Emily, that itch turns into a knot of worry. They try her phone. Nothing. Texts go unanswered. The minutes tick by, and the sun starts to sink lower in the sky. Now it's serious. Sarah starts pacing, her mind spinning in 1,000 directions. What if something happened? Mark tries to stay calm, telling her it's probably nothing. Maybe Emily went to a friend's house and forgot to call. But even he feels the tension building. It's unlike Emily to be unreachable for this long. They start calling her friends. Have you seen her? Did she come over after school? But no one has any answers. By now, it's dark. The once peaceful house feels suffocating, the silence unbearable. The police are called, and officers arrive, their flashing lights painting the quiet street in shades of blue and red. Suddenly, their home is a crime scene, and Emily is officially a missing person. Sarah's heart sinks deeper with every passing second. Mark can barely contain his frustration, snapping at the officers who ask the same questions over and over. The search begins. They comb through the neighborhood, calling Emily's name into the night, checking parks, the school, any place she might have gone. Tom is right there with them, flashlight in hand, acting like a second father, like he's as desperate as they are to find her. But with every empty street they walk, every unanswered call into the darkness, the dread sinks in deeper. Where is she? Hours pass, and the reality sets in. Their daughter has vanished. The once calm, suburban life they took for granted now feels like a distant memory, replaced by this nightmare of not knowing where Emily is or if she's safe. Sarah's sobbing in Tom's arms, while Mark is on the phone, barely holding it together as he answers police questions about his daughter's habits and friends. And there's Tom, still so calm, so supportive, almost too calm. The night drags on, but there's no sign of Emily. No one can explain what happened, and that knot in Sarah's stomach. It's turned into a pit of terror. Every worst-case scenario flashes in her mind. Tom wasted no time. He was at their door within minutes of hearing the news, offering his help before they even had a chance to ask. You know the type of guy. Someone who just seems to know what to say, when to show up, how to keep things moving when everything feels like it's falling apart. Tom walks in and immediately takes control of the situation, like he's done it 100 times before. He's the one who calms Sarah down when she's on the edge of hysteria. She's pacing the living room, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face as she frantically checks her phone for any sign of Emily. We'll find her, Tom says, his voice steady, almost soothing. He puts a reassuring hand on her shoulder, guiding her to sit down, telling her to take deep breaths. He tells her she needs to stay strong for Emily's sake. And Sarah, in her desperate state, clings to that hope. He makes her feel like everything's going to be okay, like he knows they're going to find Emily. With Mark, it's different. Mark is holding it together, barely, but he's on edge, ready to snap at any moment. He's not the kind of guy who handles feeling helpless well. He's used to being in control, to fixing things, and now his daughter's missing, and he doesn't have a single clue where to start. But Tom has a way of reading the room. He knows Mark doesn't need reassurances. He needs action. So, Tom steps in. "Mark, come on, let's go," he says, pulling him into the search. "We'll split up, cover more ground. I'll take the north side of the neighborhood, you go south." Tom organizes the search like a pro. He gathers the neighbors, splits them into groups, hands out flashlights, and sends them off in different directions, all while keeping a calm, methodical approach that helps keep the chaos at bay. He's the one who tells Mark to check the school again, just in case, even though they've already looked once. He combs through the nearby parks himself, his flashlight cutting through the trees as he calls out Emily's name. When the search turns up nothing and the tension rises even higher, Tom is back at the house, doing whatever he can to keep Sarah from falling apart. He makes her tea she can't drink, tells her stories from when Emily was younger, reminding her of the good times. Anything to distract her from the crushing silence. He tells Mark that they'll keep looking through the night if they have to, that they won't stop until Emily is home safe. And somehow, in the middle of all the chaos, his voice is the only thing that cuts through the panic. Sarah leans on him more than she does Mark at this point. Tom is there, holding her hand when she breaks down, telling her that it's going to be okay. When she starts spiraling, imagining the worst. What if Emily's hurt? What if she's been taken? Tom is the one who pulls her back, who says, "No, Sarah, don't think like that. Emily's strong. We'll find her." Little did anyone know what was about to happen next. After days of agonizing silence and dead-end leads, Mark felt the weight of despair settle deep in his chest. The police? Useless. They'd canvassed the neighborhood, made calls, questioned everyone, and still nothing. Emily was still missing. And with every day that passed, hope felt more like a memory than a reality. But Mark wasn't ready to give up. He couldn't. Something wasn't adding up in his gut. His gut was telling him to look closer, much closer. It started with a feeling, a small itch that wouldn't go away. Maybe it was because the police weren't getting anywhere, or maybe it was just a father's desperation. But as Mark lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling, he began to replay everything in his mind. Every moment, every interaction since Emily had gone missing. And it all kept circling back to one person, Tom. Tom had been so helpful, hadn't he? Always there. Always the one who stepped in at just the right moment. But there was something strange about how calm he'd been, how composed, and the way he was always around, always offering support. Too much support. Something was off, and Mark could feel it in his bones. The next day, after Sarah had finally fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion, Mark slipped into his study. It was time to dig deeper. He started small, just a search, just to see if there was anything about Tom he didn't already know. He expected to find nothing, to reassure himself that Tom was just being a good friend. But what he found instead set off a chain of suspicion he could no longer ignore. At first, it was just old news articles, things Mark hadn't known or bothered to ask about. Tom had moved around a lot when he was younger, always hopping from one job to another, never staying in one place for long. Sure, that could mean anything, but why hadn't he ever mentioned it? Then Mark stumbled upon something unsettling. Tom had once been questioned in connection to an incident. The article was vague, but the implications were enough to send a chill down Mark's spine. The charges had been dropped, and no one seemed to know the full story, but it was there. Tom wasn't as squeaky clean as Mark had always believed. Mark's mind started racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more, much more. So he kept digging, and that's when he found it. Emily's phone. It had been sitting on the counter ever since the police returned it after their sweep. They'd already checked it, hadn't they? But Mark, now more paranoid than ever, couldn't resist the urge to look for himself. And that's when he found the messages, ones the police had missed, buried under encrypted apps and hidden folders. The messages were between Emily and Tom. At first, they seemed innocent enough. Small talk jokes, things you'd expect between a family friend and a teenager. But as he scrolled further, the tone shifted. The messages got more personal, more intimate. Tom was asking questions no grown man should be asking a girl Emily's age, about her life, her thoughts, her body. Mark's blood ran cold. What was this? And then there were the phone calls. Late at night, when Mark and Sarah were asleep, Emily had been talking to Tom for hours. Mark could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he pieced it all together. The phone calls, the secret messages, the way Emily had been pulling away lately. It was all starting to make sense in the most horrifying way possible. Tom had been too close to Emily. Far, far too close. Mark's hands trembled as he closed the phone. His mind raced, trying to wrap itself around what he had just uncovered. How had he missed this? How had they both missed this? And then rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. How dare Tom, his best friend, the man he trusted with everything, the man who had been in their home, who had helped them search for Emily like he cared. It was all a lie. All of it. Without thinking, Mark grabbed his keys and stormed out of the house. He didn't care what time it was, didn't care about anything except confronting Tom. The drive to Tom's house was a blur. Mark could barely see through the haze of fury clouding his mind. When he arrived, he pounded on the door until Tom answered, looking startled but somehow unsurprised. "Mark, what the hell?" Mark didn't wait. He shoved the phone in Tom's face, barely able to keep his voice steady. "Explain this," he hissed, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. Tom looked at the phone, his expression carefully neutral. For a split second, Mark saw something flicker in his eyes. Was it fear? Guilt? Whatever it was, Tom quickly masked it. He stepped back, raising his hands in mock surrender. "It's not what you think," he said smoothly, too smoothly. "You're overreacting, Mark." But Mark wasn't having it. He pushed forward, forcing Tom to back up into the house. "Overreacting? You've been talking to my daughter behind my back, sending her these disgusting messages, calling her at night. What the hell were you thinking?" Tom didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his expression calm, almost eerily so. "I never touched her, Mark. You're letting your imagination run wild. Those messages? They were nothing. Emily and we just connected. She needed someone to talk to. You and Sarah," he paused, letting the words hang in the air like a poison. "You weren't around. I was. That did it." Mark lunged at Tom, grabbing him by the collar, ready to tear him apart. But Tom didn't fight back. He just smiled, a cold, twisted smile that made Mark's skin crawl. "You need to stop this," Tom said quietly. "If you keep pushing this, if you make this public, you're going to destroy your family. Think about Sarah. Think about how she'll handle this. Think about Emily. What do you think this will do to her? She'll be ruined." The threat hung in the air like a noose tightening around Mark's throat. Tom wasn't just denying it. He was daring Mark to expose him, knowing full well the damage it would cause. Mark stood there, fists clenched, heart racing, as the horrifying realization washed over him. Tom had him trapped. The truth was out, but now the real question was, what was Mark going to do with it? The investigation started to take a darker turn. The police, originally convinced that Emily had run away, started to entertain a more sinister possibility: abduction. When they asked about potential suspects, Tom's name had come up, but no one could believe it. Tom was like family. He'd been involved in every part of their lives, always there to help. Yet, as more evidence surfaced, Mark's worst fears began to take shape. It started with small details. A neighbor had seen Tom's car parked near Emily's school the day she disappeared. Odd, considering he lived on the other side of town. Then, there were the phone records. The late-night calls between Emily and Tom. Mark had thought the police had gone over everything, but as he began to dig deeper on his own, with the help of a private investigator, more damning evidence began to appear. Tom wasn't just a family friend. He was watching Emily, tracking her movements, gaining her trust. The police, at first skeptical, began to take Mark's suspicions seriously. Days turned into weeks, and then one night, just as the investigation seemed to hit another dead end, the call came. Emily had been found. It was late, past midnight, when Mark and Sarah rushed to the hospital where Emily had been taken. The police had found her in a small cabin, deep in the woods, disoriented and traumatized. She was sitting on the edge of the bed when they found her, staring blankly at the wall, her hands trembling, her clothes torn and dirty. She didn't speak when they brought her in, didn't react when her parents arrived, sobbing with relief. She just sat there, distant, hollow, like a shell of the vibrant girl she used to be. Mark's heart shattered when he saw her. He rushed to her side, but she didn't even look up. Sarah, holding Emily's hand, kept whispering her name over and over, as if trying to pull her daughter back from the edge of whatever dark place she'd been in. But Emily barely responded. She was lost, trapped in a fog of confusion and fear. The police began questioning her, but her answers were scattered, jumbled. She couldn't remember how she got there. She didn't know why she was there. All she could recall were fragments: a car ride, someone's voice, whispers in the dark. But none of it made sense. The more they pressed, the more she retreated into herself, as if the truth was too painful to bring to the surface. As the investigation continued, more details began to emerge. Tom had been the last person seen near the cabin. He had been using a fake identity to rent it out for months, and he had meticulously planned every detail of Emily's disappearance. The horrifying truth was slowly unraveling. Tom had been grooming Emily for years. He had gained her trust, manipulated her, convinced her to keep their relationship a secret from her parents. It had started small, harmless conversations, friendly texts, but over time, it escalated. Emily, young and naive, hadn't understood what was happening. She thought Tom was just someone who understood her, who listened when no one else did. The police pieced together the rest. Tom had orchestrated her disappearance, planning to take her far away, to isolate her completely from her family. He had preyed on her vulnerability, feeding her lies, convincing her that her parents didn't love her, that they wouldn't understand. But something had gone wrong. Emily, at some point during the plan, had fought back. She had run, gotten lost in the woods near the cabin, where the police eventually found her. Mark's heart broke all over again, not just for Emily, but for Sarah too. The guilt was eating her alive, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. Tom's betrayal had torn their family apart, and Sarah was drowning in the weight of her inaction. But the worst part, Tom had been right there the whole time, smiling in their faces, comforting them, leading the search for Emily, all while knowing exactly where she was. And now, with Emily found, the truth had come crashing down, destroying the perfect world Mark and Sarah had built. Tom had taken everything from them. The only question that remained was, how would they ever put the pieces back together?